Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews. Today we're going to check out yet another brand new PNSO release, and this one you might be looking at and thinking, well, we've already had this figure before, and you would be right because we have had this Ankylosaurus in the past, but they've recently released a new version of it, kind of like a touched up version as far as the paint scheme goes. Now, I'm not too sure how much it differs from the initial release, but I feel like there's definitely some differences, although I feel like there are also kind of slight differences. But the only way to really tell, I guess, would be to get the figure in hand, and that is exactly what I have done here, as we have the Ankylosaurus, the new version here, to take a look at, and we will compare it with the older one here in a little bit to see just how different it is in comparison. But as far as the box art goes, you can see we have a really nice image of the Ankylosaurus here on the front of the box, as well as, again, PNSO, and the Ankylosaurus name right there. We also have another image up here on the top, and then an image over here on the side, as well as an image over here on the side, and then the same image, of course, again on the back of the package. So let's pop this out of the box and take a look at it. So we've got ourselves a poster. That's the very first thing that I saw opening the package. So we can go ahead and open this up and take a look at some more incredible PNSO artwork here. Oh man, there's some really nice stuff in this image. Some species I would love to see get an actual release from PNSO. But you can see again some beautiful artwork as per usual. Just gorgeous overall. Again, the type of thing that I would love to have framed and put up onto my wall, but I honestly don't have enough wall space for all of these incredible posters that PNSO gives you in every release. Maybe someday I'll own some sort of a dinosaur figure museum and I'll be able to put all these posters up everywhere. And then we've also got the booklet that you usually get when it comes to a PNSO release. You can see as we move through, you're going to find all kinds of information, of course, on PNSO, as well as the Ankylosaurus. And there's a very nice image of our Ankylosaurus, giving us a sneak peek of the figure. And again, I really can't pick up on too much of a difference between this and the older release, so I'll be very intrigued to see just how different they are once I get the figure and pull it out of the packaging and bring it over here. Of course, these are the first things that kind of slide out of the packaging would be these extras. And as you roll through, you start to see more and more images, of course, of the Ankylosaurus. Like, that is a really nice looking image right there. Beautiful artwork on the part of PNSO. And you will find this throughout the course of the entire booklet, as you always do. Look at that. That is just like one of the most majestically beautiful Ankylosaurus heads that I think I've ever seen. Just incredible artwork. Again, PNSO has probably the most beautiful artwork I think I've ever seen from anyone ever. Look at that, really cool, kind of like a hand-drawn and colored image right there. And then as we move along, we get more really cool hand-drawn images, which I always state that I love hand-drawn images of dinosaurs. So this area of the booklet is actually really quite cool. Definitely digging this. And there's quite a bit of it. There's a very nice one there as well. Again, very cool stuff always included in these booklets. And of course, it's just loaded with information and really nice imagery of the Ankylosaurus. So lots to look at, lots to read when you get one of these PNSO releases and you get the very cool booklet that comes with it. And then here is our newest version of the Ankylosaurus, and it's definitely very nice looking, but honestly, it reminds me a lot of the original one. And one thing that I really loved about the original one was the really nice, like, light colored wash that was applied to the top of it that creeped in and out of all of the scales. And I see that same thing again here on this one. Now, I do know, and I have heard from quite a few people, that as the initial Ankylosaurus released by PNSO had gone on, as far as, you know, the more times that it was run, that the paint application kind of altered, and the kind of light wash, I feel like, started to disappear on the figure, or at least some people had told me that. Again, I don't know how true that is because I didn't acquire any of the Ankylosaurus after the initial one because I already had it, so I didn't purchase any of the latter ones, and I don't know how much the paint application actually altered from the original one, but I can say that this one here definitely sports that nice light wash, which I think is one of the most appealing aspects of the initial one. And overall, like, this is a gorgeous looking paint application for a gorgeous looking Ankylosaurus. This Ankylosaurus is my favorite Ankylosaurus that I've ever seen in my life, and You can probably tell just by looking at it why. Like, it is just a majestically beautiful version of an Ankylosaurus with a nice head tilt just kind of looking over at us, with probably one of the most realistic looking paint applications that I've ever seen on an Ankylosaurus figure, or at least that's how I felt about the original one, and that definitely follows through to this one because this looks pretty much just as beautiful as the original. So let's go ahead and jump straight to a closer look at it right now. So, of course, as far as the sculpt goes, we don't need to review the sculpt because we already have done that with the initial Ankylosaurus review. So if you would actually like to see a more detailed review of the sculpt itself, make sure you check out the initial review of the Ankylosaurus from the very first time it was released. But this time what we need to take a look at is basically the paint scheme, because that is what has been advertised as different on this one in comparison to the older one. There's quite a bit of like orange tones in this one. And I think there might have been some on my initial one, but the oranges weren't so vibrant. Like, you can really see some of the oranges popping up here and there, like right here, and you can see some up here in the head. Like, it looks really cool. Definitely a very nice addition to the figure if that, again, in fact, wasn't on my older one, which I don't believe it was, and it definitely, if it was, it wasn't so vibrant like we see on the newer one. But as far as the coloration goes, for the head, you can see the head sports a really nice brownish tone of color, actually more like a few different variations of browns. The eye has been given a nice black and also sports a pretty nice gloss coat to it, so it shines pretty nicely. And you can see there's a lot of really nice paintwork to the head of the Ankylosaurus, making it look super realistic. And it also sports that nice light wash, the same light wash that we see there on the back of the dinosaur. It's definitely present here in the face, which is great because it really highlights some of the scale detail right here on the side of the face. I really love when they do that because I think it just adds such a major element of realism to a figure by adding in different washes, especially light ones like we see here on this Ankylosaurus. And again, the color variation is fantastic on the figure. Like, you could see some really nice different tones of color on the spike there sticking out of the side of the head, making it look very weathered and very lifelike. You could see the same thing for the spike down here on the lower part of the face. And as you move up here, again, you can see more beautiful paintwork with many different varying tones of color. It's honestly hard to really pick up on exactly what tones of color you're seeing. There's like different variations of light browns and off-whites. And then as you move up here to the top of the head, you of course can continue to see that nice light wash that is present on the figure, but you can also start to see some more vibrant coloration as we have quite a few different tones of oranges, yellows, light browns, and even blacks up here on the top. There's just a ton of different colors that kind of transition back and forth very nicely, and it gives it a very realistic appearance. And you can also see some of these yellowish tones are really quite vibrant, like they really pop up here on the top of the head, which really amps up the flashiness of the figure, which is pretty impressive when you can make an Ankylosaurus look flashy, because it's probably one of the least flashy dinosaurs I think out there. But as you move back into the back, you can see again more of that coloration, pretty much reminiscent to what we just saw there in the face, where we have many different tones of color, and the coloration is added in the most realistic way possible. Like, it looks incredibly natural. Nothing on the figure looks even remotely like paint. It really does look like genuine body color, and they've also highlighted all of the armor area here along the back beautifully with variations again of like off-whites as well as browns. Like, it's really impressive to see how much color variation is included on the figure, because there really is a ton. And I love that here along the side you can see that it starts out with like a darker tone of color before transitioning to lighter edges as we reach the tips of those areas, which looks super nice. And just like we saw in the head, you can continue to see how that light wash just ties everything together beautifully. Again, just like we saw on the original Ankylosaurus release. And I like how even over here, like, you could see some have the yellowish tones of color to them as well, which is really cool. I like seeing difference like that. Like, that's really neat to me. And as you lead back here into the tail, you start to see some light coloration picking up here in the tail. Like, it turns to almost like a light off-white, kind of bordering on a light yellow, which is really neat. And the wash is also out here, so the wash continues throughout the course of the entire figure, but you can see that we still have some of the kind of like transitioning back and forth between colors out here under the tail, but it definitely the majority of the tail becomes a lighter tone of color with that kind of like light yellow before reaching the club tail of the Ankylosaurus. And you can see we have some variations of dark browns, even oranges, and the majority of the club tail is like a light yellow, which definitely looks different than the original one. So that's one area I'm really picking up on as far as color difference goes compared to the original. And you can see that as far as the underside, we have like some nice variations of that same light yellow. You can see that picking up here in the stomach region as well, as we have quite a bit of the light yellow here. And then we have some of those dark brown stripes that kind of leak down here along the side of the dinosaur. You can also see some very nice variation of color leading down the front leg, as we have variations of browns, as well as some nice dry brushing with what appears to be like a very dark gray. And then there's also some more of that wash showing up in certain areas of that leg. You can even see actually some hints of the orange on the front. And that continues all the way down into the foot. Same deal for the rear leg. Again, you can see more of that wash kind of creeping down within the thigh, and just a plethora of very nice alternate tones of color throughout the course of the figure. They always do such a great job on the Ankylosaurus, and I feel like it's probably one of their best figures of all time, which is why I was so intrigued to get this newer version to see how different it was in comparison to the older one, and in general to just have two of this Ankylosaurus now with slightly different paint schemes, because it kind of creates a family. And you can see the paintwork looks pretty similar over here, pretty much the same as what we had seen on the previous side. I think I see a little bit more black on this side, more so than the brown striping. Like, there's the brown, but there's also some hints of black over here. Oh yeah, that was actually present over here. I just didn't notice it. So there's definitely some really nice coloration to the Ankylosaurus overall, and you can continue to see again as we lead out into the tail, we have more of that kind of striping effect leading down, but the majority of the tail now is again that yellowish tone of color. And then for the underside as well, same similar appearance with those light yellow tones. And then we also have some nice areas of light airbrushing with some variations of brown for the underside. So really beautiful work again on the part of PNSO as far as this Ankylosaurus goes. Really nice alternate version of the Ankylosaurus compared to the older one. But let's go ahead and grab the older one and check them out together. So here is the original release, the very first release. And actually, looking at it, like honestly, I really see some strong similarities between the two. And actually those oranges that I didn't think were present on my older one, they are present on the older one. So I don't know why I didn't recall those being there, but you can see if we bring the newer one up with the older one, they are very similar. One thing that I can pick up on is the fact that the older one is a darker brown. Like, the overall tones of brown and shades of brown are much darker. They're also more plentiful on the older one. There's a lot more brown on the top, whereas the newer one here has a strong variation of light browns as well as the yellows and oranges. The older one, again, is just in general a darker tone of brown overall. As you lead out into the tail, you continue to see some difference in color, as the tail of the newer one is a lot lighter, again, like a yellowish tone. You don't see that so much on the older one. There's more of like the darker brownish tone. The tail clubs are entirely different as far as coloration goes. The newer one sports more of a yellowish tone, whereas the older one has kind of like off-whites and very dark browns, maybe bordering on dark grays, whereas this one we have variations of browns and oranges out there on the club tail. You can even see some difference here in the faces. The faces in general are painted differently, as the older one has like some variation of blacks and very dark browns, but the majority of the face is like that yellowish tone, whereas the newer one has more of a brownish face overall. So there's definitely some difference there. And let's see what the front looks like. The front definitely looks very similar, not too different. You can see the underside also sports some difference as far as coloration goes. We have like some orangish browns on the older one. We don't really see those on the newer one, but also like some light pinkish tones on the older one, which we don't see on the newer one. You can also see that the variations of browns that the legs are also different, as the older one is a slightly lighter shade of brown than the newer one. And you can continue to see that in the rear leg as well. So very similar tones of yellow for the underside, though I will say that. And you can also again see, just looking at them side by side, that the colors definitely have differed. The newer one just seems in general like a lighter tone of color compared to the older one, which was darker tones of color. So there are definitely some pretty significant differences, although they look very, very similar. So I will say that I absolutely love that aspect, actually, because now it kind of creates, like I had said earlier, like a family of Ankylosaurus where they look like they would belong together. They look like they would be a group, but they at the same time look a little bit different with some slight differences as opposed to drastic differences. So definitely a very cool release on the part of PNSO. So as far as a size goes on the Ankylosaurus, it is exactly the same sculpt as the original one. So if you have the original one, you're not going to see any difference in size or anything. But if you do not, then you can see here, roughly for a length, you're looking at about 9 inches or 22.5 centimeters, closing in on 23. The highest point, I think, might be this slight bend in the tail. So a little over 2.25 inches or around 6 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line in comparison to our Ankylosaurus from PNSO, showing off the fact that it definitely sports a pretty good size overall, but isn't anything that's super huge or super massive that's going to take up too much room in your collection. So as far as an Ankylosaurus goes, it is honestly a great size. And then for another comparison to show the two together just standing here, here are both the older and newer versions of the Ankylosaurus next to each other. Again, I think that they would absolutely be a great pair to put together and create some really cool dioramas of a family of Ankylosaurus that look similar, but again have some slight differences, which in my opinion makes them so much more realistic. Really cool on the part of PNSO to create a variant that looks so similar, but again has some slight differences between them. And not everyone's probably going to feel that way, because some people might think, well, you should have just went for a straight up repaint. I, however, prefer it like this, because then you can continue to keep both Ankylosaurus together and they look like they belong together. And I don't really intend on doing too many comparisons or anything with this guy, because again, we've reviewed him in the past. But here are the Triceratops, and actually we'll put the Centrosaurus back here in comparison to the Ankylosaurus. If you have any of these newer figures, you're interested in what the size in comparison to the Ankylosaurus is, here's a rough idea of what they look like in comparison to each other. And since I have both of these ceratopsians sitting here, again, with my recent PNSO haul, I figured it would be a good idea to just kind of throw them up here together and show you them in comparison to the Ankylosaurus. So this brand new version of the Ankylosaurus from PNSO is another fun release from them. If you have the original one, you may not feel the need to purchase the newer one because the colors aren't too different. But if you have one of the later runs of the older one, you may be inclined to purchase the newer one, because again, I have heard that some people liked the light wash of the older one and it wasn't present on some of the later releases. So this is definitely a good choice to go and get one that looks so similar to the older one, but at the same time, again, sporting some slight differences, which I really do like. I love the fact that it doesn't look exactly the same. They have changed and switched some things up as far as the paint scheme goes, and still continued to give it that nice, very vibrant coloration, as well as the beautiful light wash, which is something that, again, I was such a huge fan of on the first one. Definitely a huge fan of it here on the second one. I think all of the paint application of the Ankylosaurus is really nice and naturally applied. Everything on the figure looks like body color. Nothing looks like paint on a figure, and that is always a huge plus when you get a dinosaur model and you can get one that has such a realistic and lifelike paint application. The sculpt, of course, is fantastic, extremely appealing to the eye. Again, a very nice, and I've mentioned it a few times already in this review, a nice majestic appearance for the Ankylosaurus, as it's just walking along with a slight head tilt. It doesn't look like it's scared. It doesn't look like it's defending itself, which is something that you would often see when it comes to an Ankylosaurus, because they're usually sculpted out in kind of, somewhat dynamic positions where they're defending themselves. PNSO has chosen to go the route of just a nice, calm, walking Ankylosaurus with a slight head tilt, and I absolutely love the overall appearance and sculpt of this Ankylosaurus. Again, as highly detailed of an Ankylosaurus model as you're probably ever going to find. You also have a very nice size for the model, because it's not anything super huge, it's not anything super small, so that as well is, in my opinion, a pretty big selling point to this figure. It's a very nicely sized Ankylosaurus. And then you get those really cool extras that we had shown off earlier in the review as well. So another fun release from PNSO, and one that I welcome into my collection with open arms, as my original Ankylosaurus now has a mate to go with it. So if you are interested in this, I will include a link in the description to where you can purchase this on Amazon.com as well as Aliexpress on both of those PNSO stores. So make sure you check the link in the description, go pick up this really cool version of the Ankylosaurus, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.